Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go, here we go.
The next chapter is on the morality of human actions. So how do we judge whether a human action is moral or not? Whether it's good or bad, right or wrong? How do we judge that? In traditional moral theology, the morality of an action, the goodness or rightness of an action, is determined by three things. What are those three things? The intention of the person. So the intention matters. Whether you meant to do something on purpose matters. So what is your intention? That's the internal part. You can't see another person's intention. That is, say, you just have to take a person at his or her word when they say what their intention was. What you can see is the second part, the act in itself. The act in itself is the means to an end. It's the external part that you can see and that you could take a photo of, whatever it is that they did. But we also have to take into account not only the intention and the act in itself, but also the circumstances, because the circumstances will also involve how right or wrong that action was for whichever person involved. So according to St. Thomas Aquinas, the morality of an action can't be determined apart from the intention. So you can't say that something is right or wrong unless you know the person's intention. Think about that for all those things that you've been told are right or wrong. No, it depends on a person's intention. Lying is wrong. No. As we saw in the example of Terry lying to the person at the door with a gun, it depends on your intention. Her intention was not to harm her relationship with God or others. That was not necessarily wrong. It depends on your intention. So, two actions could seem the same. We saw two different people lie. One could be wrong. One may not be wrong. Two people killed another person. One killed them in avarice or greed. Okay, that would be wrong. The other killed in self-defense. Okay, maybe that's not morally wrong in the same way that the other one was. What's important is that the means needs to be proportionate to the end, so that, for instance, if you're killing in self-defense, well, the means is proportionate to the end. The end, the goal, is saving my life, if we had that still up on the board, right? The first inclination I have is to save my life to survive. So the end, the goal that I have is surviving, and so the means can't outweigh that. So for instance, in order for me to survive, maybe I just have to shoot to wound. Okay, that's fine. Or maybe I shoot to kill. Boom, I'm still alive. I've kept my goal. But for me, you've come at me. For me to shoot you 46 times even after you're dead, okay, that may be going a little too far. You follow me? So the means must be proportionate to the end. So that, for instance, wounding or killing an assailant to save your life, that's the act itself, falls within the limits of doing what is necessary to save your life, which is your intention, but violence that exceeds that is not justifiable. How do we determine whether the means, the action, justifies the end, the intention? By looking at the circumstances. So how interesting. In order to call something right or wrong, good or bad, we have to think of three things. The intention, the act in itself, but also the circumstances. And so, Father Richard Gula asks, can there really be anything that is intrinsically evil? We came to that notion before, earlier this evening. Is there really anything that is intrinsically evil? Okay, to go against nature, we said, is intrinsically evil. Wait a minute. What is, in classical moral theology, three things are involved to be able to say that something is wrong. Intention, the act in itself, and circumstances. So, to say that something is intrinsically evil, wait a minute. Let's use the example of, in 1986, the U.S. Catholic bishops, or excuse me, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, referred to homosexuality as intrinsically evil. Wait a minute. They said that because it's going against nature, natural law theory. What is Father Richard Gula saying? He's saying, wait a minute, bishops, think about it. Classical theology, whether it's right or wrong, depends on your intention, and it depends on the circumstances. It's not just the act in itself that makes it wrong. Nothing is wrong in itself. Nothing is intrinsically evil. If we call something intrinsically evil, then that's evil even before you do it. No. Father Richard is saying, in classical moral theology, what makes it evil is your intention. Think of it with drunk driving, right? There are two different classifications. If you intend to kill someone, that is murder. What do we call it if you kill the person but you didn't intend it? Involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter, we call it involuntary manslaughter if you didn't mean to do it. We call it murder if you intended to do it. See the distinction? Traditional moralists then claim that some actions are intrinsically morally evil in themselves, which means it doesn't matter what your intention is. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. So that, for instance, the list that Father Richard Gula gives in his book include things like, he says, that they argue that some actions are intrinsically morally evil. Things like masturbation, contraception, sterilization, artificial insemination, direct killing of the innocent, anything that goes against nature is intrinsically evil. Joseph Fuchs says, but wait a minute, we remember that in order to be intrinsically evil, though, that means that no intention or circumstance could ever justify it, ever. Its moral goodness or badness is determined even before you do it. It's already evil before you do it. Joseph Fuchs says, if you take an action out of context, you can't say it's good or evil. You can only say that it's good or evil in a pre-moral sense, which is fascinating. We're distinguishing the moral from the pre-moral. If you say that something is intrinsically evil, like, let's choose any one of them off the list, sterilization, okay? You can only say that it's intrinsically evil in a pre-moral sense because you don't know what the intention was and you don't know what the circumstances were. The example, think of the pregnant woman with the cancerous uterus. We used that example before. Okay, pregnant woman has cancer in her uterus. She knows that if we do nothing, then they're both going to die, the woman and her fetus. If we remove the fetus, the woman, the uterus, the fetus will die, but the woman will live. Ooh. So we talked about this when it came to the principle of double effect. Do we intend for the fetus to die? No. What we're intending is for the woman to live. So for instance, when we think of the principle of double effect then, the first principle was that the action itself must be good or indifferent. Okay? Removing the uterus is morally indifferent. That is to say, we couldn't say that removing the uterus is bad in this instance. If you have cancer, and the cancer is in the uterus, then it's not morally bad to remove that. The good effect is not produced by means of the evil effect. So saving the life of the mother is not produced by the means of the death of the fetus. What's going to save the life of the mother? Not removing the fetus, it's removing the uterus. The evil effect is not directly intended. What we're intending is to save the mother's life. And finally, a proportionate reason supports causing or tolerating the evil effect. And the proportionate reason in this case is the mother's life is at stake. And so because the mother's life is at stake, we will tolerate the evil effect, the loss of the fetus, in light of that good, which is her life. But the challenge is, in Catholic moral theology, scenarios like that don't take place in a vacuum. Instead, you have to consider the intentions and the circumstances. So if someone comes to you feeling all sorts of guilt because they chose to have the uterus removed, wait a minute, what was your intention? In such situations, then, the removal of the fetus can only be a pre-moral evil at best, which isn't the same as a moral evil. So now that we're dicing and slicing all this, there's a difference between a moral evil, which is bad, and a pre-moral evil, which means it seems bad, but I don't know what your intention was or what the circumstances were. We have to evaluate all actions in relation to intentions and circumstances. We can and we do commit some pre-moral evil in order to achieve good. And also we have to note that in this chapter, anytime that he says evil, what he's really talking about is pre-moral evil. That is, it seems evil, but we don't know the intention and we don't know the circumstances.
I've been called, like when I question things, when I was Roman Catholic. You're a cafeteria Catholic. In other words, no, I don't want to eat this, Mexican
You pick and choose.
today. I want this, I want that. Be picky, That's a term that is given to some of us that do not follow the teaching of
What's
the
the
church.
term?
Exactly,
To be a cafeteria Catholic.
Cafeteria
cafeteria
Catholic.
So, meaning you're choosing to do some things but not to do other things. How interesting. But Karl Rahner would say, didn't God give you the freedom to choose? And so if something doesn't make sense, then maybe you shouldn't have to follow that. Not eating meat on Fridays of Lent, okay? If that makes sense to you, then don't do it. If it doesn't make sense to you, there are 6 billion other people on earth who are not so worried about this. Moral norms. The next chapter is on moral norms. Moral norms are the criteria for judging the sorts of persons we ought to be and the sorts of actions we ought to perform in response to God's call to be loving. We understand that we had a chapter on law. Norms are not laws. How are norms different from laws? Partly because laws have sanctions. There's a consequence. If I speed down the highway at 85 miles an hour, there is a sanction, there's a penalty for breaking that law. For breaking norms, they're not the same sorts of sanctions. They're more than just the minimal moral behaviors expected of community as translated into positive law. So positive law, why do we have laws? That's sort of like the minimum of what we have to do to be able to safeguard the public good. Norms aren't like that. Norms instead illuminate patterns of behavior and values that might shape our decisions. They provide some consistency and stability in the moral life so that I don't have to think about certain. There are norms about certain things like telling the truth. Okay, there are not laws about telling the truth. It's just a norm that we tell the truth to one another. Okay, and it helps me. I don't have to think about things in every situation. If I just remember, okay, I have to tell the truth, then it's a norm that we follow. So on the one hand, norms don't circumscribe too narrowly the scope of moral responsibility. Imagine if we start making all sorts of rules about lying. No, we just have a norm. We shouldn't lie in most circumstances. Okay? So we have a norm, but imagine if we start making all sorts of rules about lying. Isn't it better just to stick with the norm? Right? That generally we don't lie if it's for the common good. We protect the common good by not lying. So on the one hand, we don't want to reject the wisdom of the past, but we also don't want to idolize the experience of the past by raising people's norms to a status higher than what they deserve. Treating as if they're the last word in a moral conversation. Norms range from being open to extensive revision. There are some norms, some rules that we're open to changing. There are other rules that are virtually exceptionless, says Father Richard, and those virtually exceptionless norms put the burden of proof on those who would want to make the exception. They're virtually exceptionless, but if you're going to break it, then the burden's on you. Having said all this, now are we ready to help the people who come to us looking for advice on what they should do in difficult situations? How's this for a way to close this course? Let's talk about when people come to you and ask for your advice about what to do in a certain situation. How do you respond?